Today, we're going to see how Abraham Lincoln used his power as president to free the slaves and help the United States win the Civil War. And he's going to do so with something called the Emancipation Proclamation. That word emancipation means to free something. Emancipation means freedom. To emancipate means to set someone or something free. So emancipation means freeing the slaves. And as we look at this picture here, we kind of see at the top, it's like emancipation, like heavenly and glorious. But then as we look down at the surrounding images, we still see a lot of pain and turmoil and suffering happening, right? Even though what we would think is that freeing the slaves would lead to this nice, pretty image in the middle, a nice free family enjoying a meal together, sitting in the living room next to the fireplace, like, that's what emancipation and freedom should look like. But the reality was, there were still some struggling and suffering that are gonna need to take place. But the first step really would be freeing the enslaved people, right? Setting them free, emancipating them. So let's take a look at how Lincoln did that. You see, he had a major challenge. The United States Constitution did not prohibit slavery. That means there was nothing against slavery in our Constitution. Our Constitution did not say that slavery was illegal. In fact, it said the opposite, right? In our Constitution, it was written that slavery would actually be allowed for some time. You see, when they first wrote the Constitution, many of the authors of the Constitution still had slaves themselves. So they were like, we're not quite ready to end slavery yet, so let's just make it someone else's problem. Like, they literally wrote that in our official Constitution, which explains how our government works. They actually said, let's make them deal with it in 1808. Like, for real, they put 1808 in the Constitution to say that's when they're going to have to figure it out. And as we saw, 1808 came and went, and slavery continued even more in the United States. So the Constitution said nothing about ending slavery. In fact, the Constitution kind of supported it for a while. And so Lincoln had to use his background as a lawyer to come up with a solution to this problem, right? He was like, I'm a lawyer. I need to come up with an argument for ending slavery, because he knew he didn't have the support of the Constitution, but he also knew slavery was wrong. So he needed to come up with this legal argument in order to free the slaves. So here's what he did. He used kind of the South's mentality against them. So we've talked about this before. How did slave owners legally consider their slaves, right? Well, they thought of them as property, right? Now, as much as Lincoln didn't agree with that himself, he's basically saying, okay, wait. So you're saying that these aren't people. You're saying that these are property, right? And so in the South, they'd be like, yeah, we own them. They're ours. Slaves are our property. So Lincoln's like, all right, I totally disagree with that, but that's what you're saying, right? That slaves are your property. Okay, let's work with that. So we're here now in the middle of the Civil War. So in war, armies are fighting each other. What happens to the property that one army captures from another during war? Well, the answer there is it becomes that army's property, right? Anything that one army captures from another ends up belonging to the winner, right? And ends up belonging to the government of the winning army from that battle. So therefore, if the Northern Army, if the United States Army wins battles in the South, then they get to capture their property. And all of their property will now belong to the United States government because it was, the United States Army that won the battle. So Lincoln is using this argument there and saying, okay, so if we win a battle, then we get your guns and we get your horses and we get your food and we get your, barrels and carts and, wheels and shovels and everything. We get your property, including your slaves, because you say that slaves are property. Therefore, if we win the battle, then we get your property. Now, the North isn't going to treat them like slaves, right? In fact, once you get something, you get to do what you want with that thing. So if you get a shovel, you can dig holes with that shovel. If you get their food, you can eat that food. If you get their horse, you can ride that horse. And if you get their slave, then you can free them. Right? So instead of saying, oh, your slaves are now our slaves, they're saying your property is now our property. And so if we capture your slaves, we're going to set them free because we can legally do that because they're contraband. They're ours now, right? So this is the argument that Lincoln used to free the slaves, okay? In 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which says that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. He's basically saying all the slaves are free. We just have to get to them first, right? Like we just have to keep on winning battles and winning battles and winning battles and taking your slaves as contraband, and then we'll set them free. But it's like he's setting them free ahead of time. He's saying, just so you know, when we capture your contraband, when we get your property, we're going to set it free. So I'm just declaring them free. Now, notice some other words here. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves in the rebellious states. It only freed the slaves in the Confederate States. It did not say anything about the North, right? But guess what? It didn't need to say anything about the North because in the North, all of the states in the North had already made slavery illegal. Okay, so it would be like being redundant if Lincoln said, oh, we're gonna free the slaves in the North too, and the North would be like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. So like that wasn't necessary. So the Emancipation Proclamation does specifically say that the slaves in the South would be set free, right? It doesn't say anything about the North because it didn't need to. The northern states had already freed their slaves, okay? Now that will become an issue a little bit later because there was still, maybe a slave here and there. Someone was getting away with it in the North. And so that's why later they will pass the 13th Amendment, adding it to the Constitution, making it officially illegal to have slaves in the United States. Okay. But the Declaration, that was a different document. The Emancipation Proclamation basically told the Southern states, we're coming for you. And when we win the battles, we're going to take your property. In other words, we're going to take your enslaved people and we will set them free. Now, then there is one more step as part of the Emancipation Proclamation. Not only did Lincoln say, we're setting them free, but he also invited them to join the army, right? To join the Union Army and fight for that cause. So now the war was not just about preserving the Union. The war was not just about bringing the South back home. It was more than just punishing the Confederate States and forcing them to rejoin the United States again. Now, because of the Emancipation Proclamation, now the war is about freeing the slaves. And that gave a new sense of purpose to the North and enough motivation for them to say, all right, let's win this thing then. Because before they were like, why are we bringing the South back? We don't even like them. They want slavery. Let them do their own thing. Ugh, they're so annoying. But now they're like, wait, seriously, we could end slavery? Okay, then let's fight and let's win, right? So with all these newly freed people, right, the United States Army allows colored people to join the army. And so with the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln said, one, you're free, and two, you can fight for us. And so now the United States Army, the North, has even more soldiers who really want to fight for their own freedom, right? So what do you think were some of the advantages? Well, by having colored people or African Americans join the military, now they're going to have more numbers as well as a really, really good cause for fighting. And basically, the Emancipation Proclamation would lead to the United States Army being successful and winning the Civil War. Pretty genius move by the part of Abraham Lincoln, by using that legal argument to say, oh, so you're treating your slaves like property? Okay, I'll work with that. And he ended up setting them free and winning the war and bringing the country back together and ending slavery. Boom, he just did that, right? All right, so let's tie things all together. This all occurred after the Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest day in all of American military history. And that gave the Union Army enough momentum that Lincoln was like, okay, now's the time. Now, after winning the Battle of Antietam, people are like getting behind me and supporting me. And so he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, okay, which freed the slaves in the Confederate States, right? With more soldiers and a renewed sense of purpose, the United States Army is going to win. So not only was the Emancipation Proclamation a good idea because it freed the slaves, but it was also a strategic political move that made Lincoln win the war. Pretty cool stuff, right? So there we go. That's how Lincoln used his power as president to free the slaves and help the United States win the Civil War.